Hey guys, so Pistoleer Deadeye is one of those classes where I feel like it got a ton of hype at one point and never really lived up to that hype in the sense that I never really see that many Deadeyes around. When Deadeye first got its rework announced in Korea, probably almost like 6 months ago, almost half a year ago now, people were so hyped up for the class. They were like, oh my gosh, it's so crazy. It's dashing around everywhere, jumping around, doing these flips, desperados, crazy cool. And people were so into the class. Like, I remember seeing accessory prices go through the roof. And the book prices also went up as well. And people were like, oh my gosh, I'm going to make a Deadeye. This is so sick. And when the rework came out, I don't think I ever saw that many Deadeyes around. I think a lot of people made them, but I don't think a lot of people ended up keeping it in their Core 6 roster or anything like that. Probably because they saw it and were like, huh, this class doesn't really do much damage. And I think that's a common misconception. I think Deadeye actually is a very, very good class, Pistoleer specifically. Of course, Deadeye in general. But Pistoleer Deadeye, I think it's probably in A tier, if we're talking about tier list, right? S tier being at the top, A tier, probably in the middle of the pack of A tier, if not above average in the A tier. And I think that's a lot because people don't really know the class, how it plays, and kind of how to build the class. So I want to take this video to talk a little bit about kind of the areas where I feel like people are not trying to do or aren't putting importance in, which is why their Deadeye probably isn't doing as much damage as they wanted to, and as a result, probably drop the class. So hopefully this video will give you some insight into how this class works and also convince you to play the class again, or at least try to pick it back up again, because I think Deadeye is a super fun class. It's super versatile. It's very, very high uptime and just very, very flashy in general. So let's dive into it. And before you guys question, like this background right here, I just didn't. I want to do like this little transition into the game for like on like my recorder thing, but I didn't want to like change the camera setup. It's a whole thing. But let's get into this. Okay, so let's get in the game. So this is my Pistoleer Deadeye, and I want to talk a little bit about first how the class works. So Deadeye is an extremely versatile class. It's really centered around high uptime and also cycling your skills around the assault buff that's granted by your spacebar. So your spacebar from your Pistoleer engraving, right, gives you this buff called Assault. It gives you attack speed, move speed, and cooldown reduction. Now, this is really awesome, and this is what our entire kit revolves around, which is why you're actually given 2 charges on your spacebar. This may lead you to think that Pistoleer is extremely mobile, and because of it, you're just kind of like dashing everywhere. But, you are dashing everywhere. But I would not say that this is a very mobile class. And I'll go over that in just a little bit. One important thing, though, to understand is what spec does for this class. So, unlike other classes, spec does not just it doesn't increase the damage of your skills directly. What I mean by that is other classes, when you increase the spec class, it just increases the damage. Like you can see here, shotgun skill damage plus 64.19%, right? Flat damage increase. That's not the case for Deadeye, or Pistoleer Deadeye. If you look here, it says handgun skills crit damage is increased by 192%. And that's a very important thing for people to understand. Spec doesn't directly increase our damage. It increases the crit damage of our pistols. So, if you don't crit, you basically might as well not have any spec. Like, if you don't crit, you're doing no damage, which is why crit is extremely important for this class. And this leads me to the first thing that I see people doing incorrectly, and that's with the engravings. So if you look here, right, I've put my 5-3-1 setup here. So I have Pistoleer 3, Adrenaline 3, Cursed 3, Grudge 3, Precise Dagger 3, and Ether Predator 1. something that I see I don't know a lot of people because there's not that many Deadeyes out there to begin with, let's be real. But something I've seen Deadeyes do that is completely wrong is that instead of going Ether Predator or whatever one, they go Adrenaline one. And that is definitely not what you should do. I feel like a lot of people probably open up Loa, see people's builds, and build Deadeye like any other class. So you're like, oh, this person has a 2 on Adrenaline, so my extra engraving should be Adrenaline. Wrong. That is not the case for Deadeye. And that's because of this importance on needing to crit. As I mentioned earlier, if you don't crit, you don't do damage. So that's the reason why we run Adrenaline 3 instead of Adrenaline 1. You just don't get enough crit chance from Adrenaline 1. The time that you can use Adrenaline as your extra engraving is if you can get a 9/7 stone and get Adrenaline 2. That is the point where I'd say, okay, let's go and drop this to 2, and then we can get an extra engraving as our 3. May that be, I think a lot of people in Korea are doing like mass increase. I've seen Ether Predator, of course. I've seen Propulsion around, though I personally think Propulsion isn't that great just because if you don't keep uptime, 100% uptime on your spacebar, your assault, basically, well, propulsion buff, I guess, you're losing out on an entire engraving. And I think that's really tough, especially when you're in like a high stress situation. Let's say you're progging a raid or something like that. It's hard to keep that uptime 100%. And when you don't have it up, you lose an entire engraving. That's just so tough. So my recommendation is not to go propulsion. I'd recommend this build right here. Or if with a 9/7 stone, Adrenaline 2, you can go Ether Predator 3. You can go Mass Increase 3 is something that I've seen as well. Don't go propulsion. It's not good. It's not consistent enough in my opinion. If you think like it is the high ceiling build, let's be honest though. So if you think like, I'm a Giga Chad, I can keep it up 100% of the time, go for it. Do it. But for me, I'm not going to go for it because I know that in certain situations, high stress situations, it's hard to upkeep. So yeah. But yes, Adrenaline. Keep Adrenaline at 3 unless you can get Adrenaline 2 as your extra stat with a 9/7 stone. I feel like a lot of people just kind of like look on Loa and like basically copy and paste that build into their class without even understanding why they've built a certain way. Like Korea has a lot of different things compared to us. Now, the 9/7 stone thing, we can get those as well. But, and this is kind of unrelated to this build, but they have like things like elixirs, and that's something that you take into account when you look at people's builds on Loa. Things like that we don't have. Don't just look at it in somebody's build and just copy and paste it. Really understand why they built it that way. And in this case, with Adrenaline, keep it at 3, don't put it at 1. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is correct spacebar usage. So as I mentioned at the top of this video, right? Pistoleer Deadeye is very unique because it gets 2 charges on its spacebar, and when we hit spacebar, we get this buff called Assault. And this grants us, again, 8% attack speed move speed and minus 5% cooldown. This is the bread and butter of our class. You want this buff to be up at all times that you're attacking. This is why even though you have 2 charges of your spacebar, you pretty much never want to use it just for dodging. And that's why I say this class isn't as mobile as you think it is. How I think you should think about your spacebar is, it should be like a synergy skill. You keep it up at all times when you're attacking. Now, I think again, you should think of it as like an extra skill on your skill bar rather than a dodge. You can definitely use it as a dodge, right? But you should really only try to use it as a dodge in 2 situations. So situation A, you need to avoid a big attack that will do massive damage to you or kill you. Deadeye is a very squishy class, so a lot of stuff does do a lot of damage to you. So really only use it when that is the situation. Or B, you need to keep your spacebar uptime, right? It's about to wind down. It's about 3, 2, 1. You need to keep it up, but there's an attack coming. Okay, perfect. I can use it to keep it up, but also dodge this attack. Those are the situations that you want to use the spacebar in. You pretty much never want to use it like, let's say you have a 5. Oh, I got a dodge attack. Let's do it again. You don't want to do it like that. You want to keep it so that you always are keeping the assault buff up. You don't want to use it just as a dodge. Your spacebar is a very limited resource, so you should only use it when absolutely necessary to dodge. Every other time, you should be using it to keep your uptime on your assault buff. And this leads me to, actually, your counter skill in force execution. So, because your spacebar isn't really used as a mobility tool or a dodging tool, I'd say that this actually brings enforced execution in more as a mobility skill than anything else. And this is what my thinking, okay? This is my thought process. This skill, enforced execution, yes, it's a counter, right? It's a 2-part counter, or 2-part skill. You can kick up and then do your, up gun shoot, right? But the part that counters is this upward kick. This is an absolutely terrible, terrible, terrible counter. I would argue that it is actually the worst counter in the game. And because of that, I'd say don't use it as a counter. Now, what I mean by that is, like, in my opinion, rather than using it as a counter as the primary use, I think the primary use of your counter in force execution should be as a pseudo spacebar, as a mobility skill. Use it to dodge attacks. Use it to close the gap between bosses. Use it to position yourself well. Don't use it as a counter as kind of the main thing. As I mentioned before, our dash is an extremely, extremely valuable resource and only used to buff our attacks. So to dodge attacks, use enforced execution when it's up. Yes, the cooldown is fairly long, but the thing is, for the most part, this shouldn't be a part of your core rotation. It doesn't really do much damage. It really is used just as a filler skill in most cases, right? When your other skills are on cooldown, and then you need to use the proc quick preparation, quick recharge, sorry, or again, as a mobility skill. So use it as a mobility skill, and if the boss is about to counter right in front of you and you can get to it, maybe you can consider it as a counter, and you see like other people can't counter. Because the way I think about counters in this game, right, is there are certain classes that have better counters than others, and there are certain classes who are in position to counter a lot more than others. Those classes are supports. They can be wherever they want on the battlefield, right? So they can position themselves up front. And for the most part, they have pretty good counters. Gun Lancers, they're always going to be at the front of the boss, right? So they can hit their counters very reliably, and they're also in shield, so they don't get knocked back. And also, Hitmaster classes that have good counters. We're not any of those that I just listed. So it is not our job to counter. Again, if the situation presents itself, maybe go for it. But in reality, 9 times out of 10, either A, somebody is going to counter it before you can hit it, because your counter takes 10 years to come out. Like, literally, you have to preempt the counter most of the time to be able to hit it before other classes. Or B, you're just going to whiff it, because, again, it's such a terrible counter. The timing is so weird, it's so long. Just don't go for it. Use it as a mobility skill. Use it for yourself to get around. And also, again, in those situations, you can use it to proc quick recharge. So yeah. Lastly, I would say we want to go back and talk about the assault buff. I'd say that keeping assault buff up and running all the time is very, very important, as I mentioned before. So I want to teach you guys a good technique to keep it up. So you don't always have to like look at the buff. You don't always have to like worry about it in the back of mind. Oh, is it up? Is it down? Things like that, right? My general rule of thumb is the 3 damage skill rotation. So if you think about it in this way, you have damage skills, right? And you have non-damage skills. Your grenade and your enforced execution. They don't really do damage. So you want to be able to weave in 3 damage skills before you press spacebar again. So take a look at this, right? Spacebar, grenade, we do this, this, this. And then by the time that's up, our assault is pretty much down, right? Same with this. 1, 2 damage skills, 3 damage skills. The only time that I would say that it should be 2 damage skills is when we're using Deathfire, because the animation is so long, right? So, like that, and then 2, and then it's down, right? So, in general, 3 damage skills into a spacebar. And, of course, weave an AT grenade right before all of this, right? Whenever it's up, use it, damage skill, damage skill, damage skill. Bam. And then use it again. That way, you will keep your uptime on your assault buff and not really have to like keep looking at the buff timer, right? It's a good way for you to understand, especially at the beginning, how to keep it up. Eventually, you're going to just develop kind of like an internal timer for yourself, kind of like for a lot of classes with like adrenaline. I feel like a lot of people develop an internal timer for adrenaline as well, which is similar. I think has actually the same duration pretty much as assault. You'll develop that internal timer in your head to be able to just be like, oh, okay, I should use a skill, use a spacebar right now to keep it up without even looking at it. You'll develop that internal kind of timer. So yeah, those are my tips for you guys to play Deadeye. Again, I think a lot of people tried to pick up Deadeye at the beginning and didn't end up playing it because, you know, A, the damage probably wasn't there because you weren't playing it correctly, or B, it felt a little bit clunky because you had to use your spacebar as kind of basically a damage skill, and you weren't used to that. So hopefully these tips helped you guys with learning the class a little bit more and convince you to give it another try, because I personally, Deadeye is one of my favorite classes, right? It's super mobile, it's super flashy, Desperado is super cool, and yeah. If you guys enjoyed this video and it helped you out, please, as always, hit that like button, hit that sub button, ring the bell for notifications, and leave a comment down below. And as always, I stream every night on Twitch, 9 p.m. PST, every night. Well, usually somewhere closer to 10 p.m., honestly. I'm kind of late all the time. But yeah, twitch.tv/misosoup. Join me there. I'd love to see you guys there, even if it's just a pop and say, hey, dude, loved your video, thanks for helping me out. Or it's like, hey, saw your video, I had these thoughts. Anything like that. I'd love to see you guys there. All right, until next time, guys. Peace out.